Each week we have an in-depth conversation with one of the key players in the legislative process. This week's guest is Representative Robert Johnson of Natchez. Representative Johnson is a Democrat who serves as the House Minority Leader. Welcome to At Issue.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start in general terms. How do you think the session is going so far?
Well, it's going rather quickly. We took up a very important bill early on in the session, one that we got on a Friday, a 107-page bill that essentially just revamps our whole tax structure. And we took it up on Thursday. And that sounds like that's enough time, but we're redoing the whole tax structure. I think that deserves the attention at least of a year of study and understanding. Now, some people say, they set up a commission, but when you look at the minutes of the commission, there was nothing to talk. There was no discussion about what will actually go in the actual legislation. So I say all that to say, there are some things that may make sense in there to some people, but it's a very, very important piece of legislation we took up really early.
Some of the basics: it would start to phase out the state income tax. It would begin to lower the sales tax on groceries. It would raise the tax on gasoline. It would let cities raise their local taxes. Why did you vote against it?
So I voted against it. The primary reason I voted against it because the cut in income tax would be a $2 billion cut to the budget. And we have like a $7 billion budget, and we're cutting $2 billion out of it. So I have to think about what services are we not going to deliver, and what people are going to lose their jobs. I have to think about all of that. And so people say, well, but some cities are going to get a bump, because they get a 1.5 cent uptick on being able to collect a tax. I said, but every city that I represent, even though they get a diversion every year, and some years there's a bump on the diversion, every year those cities come to the legislature saying we need more money. Every year the counties come and say we need more money. And so a $2 billion cut in the budget means that money's never going to be there. And there are places where we spent a disproportionate amount of money, appropriated money, in certain counties and certain districts. I mean, when I say disproportionate, I'm like 10 to 20 to 30 times more than you spent somewhere else. And now that money is gone, and we're going to look at people who need new water systems, replacing old lead pipes, drainage systems that need to be done, all kinds of things infrastructure-wise around the state. And on top of the fact that we've never really looked at the serious problem we have with mental health, and we're not funding that. And so with a $2 billion cut in the budget, that's going to be a problem. And let me say this. So they say we're cutting the grocery tax down to 4.5 cents, and down from 7. If we're going to take a cut in the grocery tax, we should be eliminating the grocery tax. That's the first thing, because it's across the board that does more for people. But we're gonna cut it down to 4.5. But then we're gonna let cities put another $0.015 and let counties put another $0.015 on it. So you're really only getting a 1 penny cut in grocery tax, but you're getting a 15-cent increase. And when I say 15 cent, when you raise, you say that the gas tax is $3. Say price of gas is $3 a gallon on average. So if you take 5% of that, you're looking at 15 cents a gallon. So people who are working every day, who we don't have any mass transit, and so you're putting an extra burden on people who are trying to get to work by making them pay more in gas. You're really not getting them a real grocery tax cut, and you're cutting the budget by $2 billion a year. I just don't know how sustainable that is for the state of Mississippi.
What about the argument that supporters of eliminating the state income tax have, that by eliminating the tax on income, people who then are not paying that tax would invest in other things that would trickle down and have an impact on society as a whole and help make up for these shortfalls you're talking about?
All of that sounds good in theory, and it would, I could say, let's see how it works. But I don't have to let's see how it works. I can see how it didn't work in West Virginia. I can see how it didn't work in Kentucky, how it didn't work in Kansas, and how it's been a complete disaster in Arizona. Look, if you're going to do something with a tax system, you need to really take the time to look at what the replacement would be, where you're going to fill in those gaps. In Arizona, they're about to, public school system is about to go bankrupt because they passed a tax cut that they thought would be a $2 billion tax cut. Now it's about $2.8 billion. And they passed school choice and school voucher at the same time. So they don't have money to put in public schools. The voucher program is sucking up a lot of money to go into private schools and other places, and it just doesn't work. In West Virginia, they're raising, public schools are in trouble, the healthcare system is in trouble, and they're raising tuition at all the colleges and universities. And in Kansas, they did it back in 2010, and it was so bad, same kind of tax cut. It was so bad that Republicans who did the tax cut came back and reinstituted the income tax because it doesn't work. You can do a revamping of your tax structure, but you have to take time to do it. Now, when Philip Gunn was Speaker, these same people, Trey Lamar was on Ways and Means, he may have been a chairman at that time, but they did a tax cut bill that last time we did a tax cut, initially they did one, and they understood that it needs to be revenue neutral. And but what I'm saying is, we looked at where are we giving exemptions? We're giving over $1 billion in exemptions to corporations and machinery and equipment and different entities around the state that we did to try to help them get on their feet. And some of them have been on their feet for more than 20 years. And so what we did under that administration was went back and looked and see what we could capture, and what we cut in income tax and grocery tax, we filled in with the exemptions that we were giving away. And so we didn't take the time to do any of that look at that, even though that data is right there in front of us. And that's the problem I have. Everywhere they've cut taxes, you have to replace that cut with something. In Tennessee, they replace it with property tax. The property taxes are, just a whole lot more than we pay here. And in Florida, it's the same way. Anytime you do away with one tax, that burden is going to have to be absorbed some way. So I just think there has not been a lot of thought given to the bill, and there are a lot of things that are going to suffer as a result of it, and we need to spend more time with it and get it right if we're going to do it.
It has passed the House. It now goes to the Senate. They'll have their own plan, and we'll see where it goes from there. Let's talk about Medicaid expansion. Do you think it will happen this year? Well,
I think it will happen, and I want to applaud the House of Representatives and Speaker Jason White and the Chairman of Public Health and Medicaid for getting us a bill out and getting us a good bill out of the House last year. But by the time it went through the process, it had developed into a bill that that would not pass CMS, and the problem with it, they had a work requirement in there, which we all want people to work. We are not against a work requirement. We're only against a work requirement because everywhere they've employed one when it pertains to Medicaid, it's been an administrative nightmare, and it's been costly, and it doesn't justify. The ends don't justify the means. In Arkansas, they end up losing 15% of their eligible Medicaid population, not their new population, because the work requirement in the application process just didn't make any sense to anybody. In Georgia, they paid an accounting firm more than $8 million just to develop the application, and then they spent, I think the number is right, about $58 million just to implement the program with a work requirement, and only served about 5,500 people. So the work requirement, it's not about requiring people to work, because right now the only way you can get Medicaid is you're disabled or you're a child. And then the people who are elderly are also qualified for Medicaid, but most of them qualify for Medicare. So the only people we have not been covering are people who are working poor people who work for people who can't afford to provide private health insurance, so we want to cover them. So when you put the work requirement on, my point is, it's a little bit of a fiction. If you came to Medicaid and say, I want coverage of Medicaid, the first thing they ask is, do you work? And if you work, you don't qualify. And the only way you can qualify is you're disabled, you're elderly, or you're a child. So that program is already in place. What we want to do is make it accessible to people and keep a productive workforce in the state of Mississippi. And the work requirement is proved just to be an administrative nightmare, not the fact that you ask some people to work. Just applying that process is a problem. And so that was one reason that I didn't think it would work. But the biggest problem that we had with the bill that finally came out of the conference committee was, it wasn't that they wanted to put a work requirement in the first application that the CMS and the Biden administration said we will not approve. They wanted to write into the law, into the statute, that we will perpetually put this work requirement in there and perpetually get turned down every year. And how do I know that's what would happen? We finally got the governor to a point that he would sign a bill that approved postpartum care for women. We did that. Administratively, the Division of Medicaid put some kind of work requirement in there that wasn't in the bill, put it in there. and CMS turned it down. I'm talking about a bill that Republicans and Democrats both wanted, and then you put something in there to hang it up in the CMS process. And so I said all that to get to your actual question. What will we do this year? So we have a new administration. When Trump was in office before, when President Trump was in office before, he approved, that's how Arkansas and Georgia got work requirements. He advised through the president's office, because it's an executive position, that they would okay work requirements. They would not turn down a Medicaid application because of work requirements. And so if that's what we do this year, and with this new administration, we're saying, fine, we know it's an administrative nightmare. We'll spend more money applying that in our process than we should. But if that's the way we can get Medicaid expansion, that's what we'll do. So I think it has a chance.
So you'd be okay with a bill with the same language as last year's bill, and you feel better about it this year because of the new administration?
Because the new administration would let it go through.
How can you have the work requirement without spending $8 million on an application process?
Nobody in the country has been able to do it without doing it. In fact, it got so bad in Arkansas, they took it out. It doesn't work. It's unnecessary. It works. You should make people work who are going to get Medicaid. If they're not disabled or elderly or a child, you should make them work. But the first thing you have to do is show proof of income. And so that is already part of the process. You should not have to put on an application. So what they do is put on an application. You come in every month and show that you're still working. Or put on annually, come in and show you're still working. If you're working and you got Medicaid, you should. And if you get laid off, you should still get Medicaid, because you're working your way back into the system. Nobody wants to just get Medicaid and don't have income coming in. People want to work. I don't know what this fallacy is in the state of Mississippi. Look, in the state of Mississippi, we have some of the worst jobs you can have. Some of the jobs you can get in Mississippi, the chicken plant jobs, and people line up around the corner for a minimum wage job because everybody wants to at least have some control over their income, even the poorest of people. And this is the other thing, the dynamic people never think about. When your children go to school, children want to be able to say, they don't want to say, mama's at home or daddy's at home. They want to be able to say, my mom and daddy work. They're proud of that. And the mom and daddy want to be able to say that too. So we are a working class state. People want to work. This idea that people want to sit around the house is just a fiction. That's not true.
But is there a way to have a work requirement and streamline the process where it doesn't get bogged down in the bureaucracy?
Wilson, I'm sure there is. And that should be. If we spend some time with it, there's a way to put it in the application process and not let it get bogged down in an administrative and bureaucratic process.
Let's talk about congressional redistricting. That's coming up again this year.
Yeah.
Do you predict a fight over that?
Well, let me tell you what usually happens. So, the leadership in an effort sometimes not to have a fight will say, well, we just won't do it. And they'll send it back to the courts and let the courts do it. I anticipate, because I've tried to have a meeting with the speaker about redistricting and ask him what we're going to do. In the House, we're just going to redraw one district. It's in North Mississippi, DeSoto County. I think it's District 122 or something like that. But it's one where there's a Republican representative now. And I think the Republican leadership in the House will be hard-pressed to draw a district that will be majority Democrat. Well, it will be majority black, African-American, which translates into majority Democrat. And so I think they'd be hard-pressed to draw a district that would kick one of their members out. So they'll just say, hands off. We're not going to help. We're not going to be complicit in it. If the court is ordering us to redraw this district, and they say if we don't redraw it, then they will draw it, let the courts do it. And they can say, look, the courts did it to us. We didn't do it to ourselves. Now, in the Senate, I think there are 3 Senate districts that will be redrawn. I understand they are going through that process. They're actually looking at it, so they may draw something. But the other thing is that it will require a special election, and it won't just require a special election in that district. It will require a special election in all the contiguous districts that it affects, which in the House, in that one district, maybe 5 or 6 different legislators would have to rerun this year.
There was a lot of talk about early voting and different ways of voting with the presidential election that we just had. Would you support a bill in Mississippi that would bring early voting here?
I've introduced a bill to bring early voting here, and I encourage everyone to do a bill that brings early voting because it's something that needs to happen. Voting should be something that's easy for people. We shouldn't make it more difficult. We should have more than one day we need to vote. And somebody say, well, you can vote absentee. Well, I mean, you shouldn't have to say and make up an excuse, this is why I'm going to be out of town. You should just be able to go by your circuit clerk's office or wherever they designate to do your voting. Now, 4 years ago, when again, it's back to this current administration, he kept saying no early voting. It's a way for people to commit fraud. But this past election season, the Republican Party and newly elected President Trump encouraged people to early vote and said early voting was good. So I hope that since the leadership seems to come from the top on this issue, I hope that the current president continues to encourage people to early vote, and by way of that the Secretary of State and the leadership in the House and the Senate and the governor will say, yeah, maybe it's time for Mississippi to move into the 21st century.
Should early voting replace our current absentee voting structure?
Yes. Yeah. You shouldn't need absentee voting if you can early vote. Absentee will be, well, I'll take that back. You'll need absentee for people like who are in the military or people who are away in school.
Who can't get here
even for the early voting. Yeah. So you'll still need it, but it won't be as prolific as it is now.
Because now that's the only form of
early voting. That's the only form you
have.
Has. Yeah.
When you're facing a Republican supermajority, as is the case now, are you powerless as the Democratic leader?
I will never admit to being that. So yeah, I'm still powerful. No, but you don't have enough votes to really pass anything. But you find yourself what you look for are opportunities where there are always, especially with this new leadership, there is some effort always to do things that maybe the most right-wing part of the Republican Party is not in favor of, but the leadership in the House and the Senate who are Republican think that this is something we need to do and they need Democratic support. And so that's where some power comes in. You can exercise some leverage on certain issues by saying, look, we can help you on this, but this is what we need on this end or on this piece of legislation. And so, it makes you almost powerless, but you still have a voice. You still have an opportunity to exact some pressure, not always with your number of votes, but with your opportunity to talk about issues and maybe get the leadership to move. We've had that opportunity. We did it on Medicaid. We've had some issues on some infrastructure issues that we've been able to work together with Republicans and form coalitions where there's some Republicans who in the majority party who may not want to spend certain monies, but others understand that we may be Republican or Democrat, but we have a common interest that we represent communities that have some of the same problems, and so we find a way to be powerful in that sense.
So, as leader of the minority party, what is your role specifically in a minority position?
When you're in a minority position, you spend a whole lot more time reading and studying and doing research on legislation than you normally would, because what you're armed with is just knowing more about an issue and knowing more about a piece of legislation than the people in the majority. They don't have to. They have the votes. They sort of all sing from the same spreadsheet. They all sing from the same, organized, plan, whatever that is. And so they don't spend a lot. You talk to people, they don't all the time know. They rely on the leadership to tell them which way they should vote or which way they need them to vote. And we have to spend a lot of time educating our members on what the issues are and being able to communicate that. Because I'm going to tell you, sometimes you can be effective just by asking the right questions, just by spending time with leadership or the chairman of a committee and tell them what your issues are. And sometimes just to avoid the conflict or the very intense floor debate, you can get some things done.
Of course, the Republicans have not always controlled the House, Senate, and the governor's mansion. Do you foresee a time where that won't be the case?
Well, I may be 105 by that time, but that time is coming. But it's not imminent. It's going to take some time.
Obviously, we're very early in the session. What else do you hope the legislature will achieve this year?
I hope that we're able to recognize the needs that we have in our local infrastructure issues. You know, we in Jackson, a lot of attention has been paid to the water system and the failure of it and the rehabilitation of it. But what people don't know is everywhere in the state, everybody has 120, 130-year-old lead pipes that they transfer their water through. And all of those need to be replaced. And so what I hope we do is take a close look at what the state can do to help different communities rehabilitate those systems. I just think, I tell people all the time, people talk about public education, how do you make your communities grow, have good schools? It all starts with infrastructure, roads and bridges, and drainage, water and sewer, and water. No company, no jobs are going to be created where you don't have those things in place. And so we need to spend more time in the legislature to make sure that happens.
That's all money, right?
That's all money. That's why when you go back to the tax bill, when they talk about cutting $2 billion out of the budget, I said, look, I'm okay with that, but we got some really expensive needs. And look, the other thing that I emphasize is public safety. People want more police officers, and they want, and in order to have more police officers, you got to pay them better. And so I've always said that the state ought to be engaged with cities and counties, figuring out a way that they can help supplement the pay of local law enforcement, because that's, one way to fight crime is by improving your communities and having less disparity in terms of poverty and more opportunity. But the most immediate way to do it is have more police presence. And so, some people would disagree. They said, Democrats, what are we talking about, more police? No, I want more police, more better trained and better educated police officers. And I feel the same way about all first responders. We don't pay them enough. We don't secure them enough. And those are things that we need to do more of.
Again, it all comes down to money, doesn't it?
It all comes down to money. But look, we have money. But we won't have money if we cut the leading source of income and revenue for this state. If we cut that, we won't have money to do anything that we really need to address.
Any other predictions or insight into what will happen the rest of the session?
No predictions, but the only prediction I would tell you is that as Democrats, we will continue to do as much as we can to work across the aisle with Republicans, but more importantly, we'll be vigilant and work extremely hard to make sure that the people of Mississippi are represented correctly and the needs that we have in this state are taken care of.
Do you think Republicans and Democrats in the Mississippi legislature work together better than Democrats and Republicans in Washington?
Absolutely. When I say absolutely, maybe not absolutely, but yes, I feel that way. I feel like there's less party polarization in I think probably in just about every state, but certainly in the state of Mississippi than there is in the U.S. legislature. But we could do a whole lot better, and we need to get back. I've been in the legislature a long time. I remember when it didn't matter whether you were Republican or Democrat. Everybody talked about who they were, but communities there was more division about whether or not you were from a rural or a region, or you were from a certain region, or we stuck together. We were from Southwest, or we were along the river. You found us voting together more than whether or not we were Republican or Democrat. We need to get back to that, because that regionalism and community and demographics have more to do with what your community needs than whether or not you're Republican or Democrat.
Representative Robert Johnson, we thank you for joining us.